Hi.
Hi, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Great.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. I'm Lindsay. This is Brandy. We're going to get started here in just a second with our third, I can't believe it, Good News Friday. Hi, Brian. Hi, Pam. How are you? It's good to see some familiar faces. Go ahead and drop your location in the comments. Let us know a little bit about yourselves as far as, agroforestry, trees for the future, where you're located, your interests. Help us get to know you, and you'll have an opportunity to ask your questions in the comments as well. We'd love to answer those for you. So like I said, I'm Lindsay. I'm here in Silver Spring at Trees headquarters, and Brandy is joining from home in Virginia. I see we've got some people from all over the world the last couple of weeks, so it's really exciting to see our supporters, our staff, our business partners, our ambassadors tune in. So thank you all for being here and showing your support constantly for Trees for the Future and the farmers we serve. So let's get started. My name's Lindsay. I'm on the marketing team here at Trees for the Future, and this is our Good News Friday on forest gardens and carbon. And Brandy, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. We're excited that you're joining us today. I'm Brandy Lellou, the Director of Programs at Trees for the Future. I support our field teams in 9 countries to implement about 100 projects with 36,000 forest garden farmers now. So I'm really excited about this talk today because I have a particular interest in carbon and have been working at kind of the carbon energy water nexus for about 20 years. So I'm excited for this conversation.
Yes, it feels like Brandy and I and the marketing team are often talking about what's going on with carbon today, because it's just growing so quickly, and how we as a global community are trying to capture it and mitigate the challenges of climate change and the global warming issues that we're seeing through carbon sequestration and carbon capture. And so today's obviously a really important talk, and of course something that we wanted to talk about during Earth Month. Remember, Earth Day is coming up. It's just a week away. So we're excited to be able to share some really important Earth conservation, restoration, environmental efforts with you all today. So Brandy, tell us a little bit about the problem as it relates to carbon, both the emissions and mitigation as well.
So agriculture, I mean, a lot of times people think it's transportation is one of the biggest contributors to CO2, but actually it is agriculture. So agriculture contributes to the majority of carbon emissions, greenhouse gases throughout the world. And those gases are quantified in terms of CO2, but there's several different gases. So there's carbon dioxide, but there's also methane, which has a much higher potency, and noxious oxide. So those are the 3 main greenhouse gases that contribute to climate change and to the carbon emissions.
And for those of us who don't have a science background, I mean, it's important to note that all these gases aren't all bad, right? It's the buildup in our atmosphere of them, correct?
Correct. So, I mean, agriculture, carbon dioxide emissions increase the layer in our atmosphere that prevents that traps the heat on Earth. So as those emissions build up, that the heat has a harder time getting back out of the atmosphere. So that's what causes the warming, and then it builds on each other. And as glaciers melt in the ocean, then we start to see an increased impact of that global heat. But it doesn't mean the Earth just gets hotter. It impacts everything. It impacts climate, or it impacts weather systems and airflows. And so what we see in farming is it can impact, in some areas, it can impact via increased rainfall and flooding. In some areas, it can surface as drought, increased heat, longer periods of heat, and then also increased and decreased growing seasons in different regions, and then also where insects and other animals can live and survive. So it kind of impacts things across the board.
Absolutely, that biodiversity that you all hear us talk
Yeah.
a lot about. So how is, I'm happy you said that people think transportation is what's causing climate change, and obviously man-made climate change. There are so many different factors, but obviously at Trees for the Future and here for Good News Friday, we want to talk about land use and how it is such a leading cause of emissions. Can you break it down a little for us, Brandy? What exactly is happening to make land use such a consistent and guilty contributor of climate change?
Yeah, so land use is definitely a big piece of it. So as for areas are deforested for increased agriculture, when you cut down trees, that adds carbon dioxide to the atmosphere. When peatlands are burned for palm oil plantations, for example, that contributes huge amounts of CO2 to the atmosphere. So that change of land, but then also the way we farm also contributes to that. So the production of chemical fertilizers and the use of chemical fertilizers contributes to CO2. And then also transporting food from really far locations via shipping or truck transport is also a big contributor. So it's kind of a trifecta contribution.
Mm-hmm. And then you started to touch on it as far as how that impacts the farmer. So we have land use contributing to climate change, and then we have climate change affecting the farmer negatively. Can you touch a little bit on that? And then we brought you all here for Good News Friday, so we promise we're going to get to the solution after that.
Yeah, so all of those factors contribute to climate change, but then the people that are feeling the impacts the most from climate change are farmers, because they're so much in touch with the land and dependent on those weather patterns and those consistent weather patterns. So when those start to shift because of climate change, it's difficult to know when to plant, if there's going to be water, if there's going to be too much water, and so yeah, it's really farmers, both large and small scale farmers, but particularly small scale farmers because they don't have those resources in terms of crop insurance and stuff to fall back on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, last time we were talking, we talked a little bit about the safety nets that just aren't there in the developing world for the majority of farmers on our planet. So let's get to the good news. What is the solution that we have that all of our viewers today are contributing to, that the farmers that we're training are really putting into practice on a daily basis? How at Trees for the Future is the Forest Garden a proven solution to these problems we're talking about?
So as we talked about last time, the Forest Garden tackles a number of problems in terms of food security. You talked about last week, and nutrition, in terms of protecting the forest farmers' land from grazing cattle. But it also helps with mitigation for climate change. And so a lot of times when people talk about climate change, they talk about mitigation and they talk about adaptation. So the Forest Garden kind of comes full circle and does both. Mitigation is when you're looking at sequestering carbon dioxide and storing it in the trees. So that reduces the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And forest gardens do that in two ways. They sequester carbon dioxide both in the above and below ground mass. So that means in the trees, trunk and branches, as well as in the roots. So we can't forget about the roots. They actually sequester a large amount of carbon. And then also about 30% of the carbon that can be captured in the forest garden is captured in the soil. So it's also something that we overlook, is like soil actually captures CO2 with a large amount of organic matter in the soil and living organisms. So when you improve that soil quality, it captures carbon as well. So that helps with the mitigation of climate change. But then the forest garden also helps with the adaptation part. And so adaptation is how can farmers adapt to this thing that's already upon us? Like, we talk about climate change as something that's coming, but it's actually something that people are already experiencing. So we know that there's things that we can do to slow it, but we can't stop it. So how can we adapt to those coming changes? And the Forest Garden does that by providing farmers with lots of trees that infiltrate groundwater or infiltrate rainwater into the ground. So that prevents against flooding. It also traps green water in the roots. So when you have a lot of plants in one area, you get what you call green water, and trees and vegetables trap that water in their roots, and then they can release it during those periods of drought. Then also just having so many trees on one piece of land also creates a microclimate, so it cools the area on that land and allows lower temperatures for vegetables and plants to grow.
Mm-hmm. Our field staff often talk about the microclimate, actually experiencing the microclimate.
Yeah.
So you're walking through these semi-arid regions or driving through, you hop out of the car or off the bike, and it's very warm. And as you kind of go through that living fence, you feel the temperature come down. Is that a description of a microclimate?
Exactly. That's exactly it. So it can be like a really hot, dry, dusty day in Kaffrine in Senegal, and you walk into that forest garden, and it's immediately you feel a temperature drop. And then it also protects against the dry, hot wind that's beating up the land and everything around it. But yes, exactly.
So when in the carbon conversation, tree planting is often suggested as a solution. What is the challenge with tree planting when we think about mass tree planting, or maybe some shortcuts to tree planting, and how does the forest garden address that?
So there's all different kinds of carbon projects out there. Some are prevented deforestation, which of course we want. Like, it's so much easier to prevent, and then some are reforestation of different areas. It really is important to look at the tree species when you're planting. So planting billions of acres of eucalyptus trees might not necessarily be the best way to sequester carbon, because they can be very impactful in places where they're not native. Same with pine and a lot of other species. So species selection is really important. Also optimizing the land. So the forest garden looks at like all the vertical and horizontal space, and like how can you grow a multiple. And when you look at a forest, if you go into a forest, you see there's plants on the understory, and there's middle plants and really tall growing trees all living in that same ecosystem. So kind of recreating those ecosystems that really maximize carbon sequestration. So that's one of the really big benefits of the forest garden.
And then as those are becoming established, those trees are maturing, tell us how much is being sequestered. You touched on soil being able to draw down carbon. How much are we looking at in a typical forest garden of being able to capture and pull out of the atmosphere?
So we had a study done by Michigan State University a few years ago that did an average of forest gardens throughout all the countries. So some are a little bit less and some are more, but we're looking at about 145 metric tons of carbon per acre over a 20-year period. So that is just in the above and below ground biomass, like I was talking, just in the trees. And then we calculated from an IPCC report, which is the International Panel on Climate Change. I wanted to get that acronym right there. The potential soil carbon sequestration, and we've had others look at that since then. And so when we see that global value, it's about, sorry, I misquoted that. The total with the soil carbon and the above and ground biomass is about 145 metric tons per acre. Over 20 years.
And so why isn't it just as soon as we plant those trees, we get 145 metric tons? What's the wait to get over 2 decades, that successful capture?
So as you know, trees take a while to grow. And then they reach a very mature stage too. So it's a bit of an S curve. So where you get a slow, like initial growth, and then a higher growth, and then it tapers off. it's around like the 10th, 12th year is where you're starting to get that kind of maximum carbon sequestration. And so it builds up to that. And then once the trees reach that 20-year period, their growth potential is not increasing, but they're not releasing CO2. They're storing it in their limbs and trunk.
And roots and the soil.
Roots and the soil.
Okay, great. So we've touched on this a little bit already, but can you dig into community climate benefits and that just far-reaching, the far-reaching benefits of the forest garden and how this is helping the farmer and the community at large at the same time it's helping the planet and the environment?
So in addition to sequestering and carbon and mitigation for farmers, there's also other carbon decreasing benefits that come through the forest garden, and those are considered what people call CCBs. So it's community climate biodiversity benefits, and those CCBs are things like when you have food security in an area, you don't have to import food or have food aid. So it decreases the amount of CO2 that would be produced from transporting goods, particularly food. Also, our projects do not use chemical fertilizer, and there's a lot of CO2 in the development of chemical fertilizers. When you don't use insecticides, it increases the biodiversity of an area, and so that protects the biodiversity benefits that are one of the things talked about. And so all of these community and climate and biodiversity benefits are added benefits to that CO2 sequestration and the mitigation elements. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's, I think, something that's very popular among staff, farmers, and our supporters is just, it's, of course, there's no simple solution, but this is so clearly making a difference over the life cycle of the forest garden and the farmers. And it's not just a solution to one thing. It's creating all of these benefits as it grows, which is really an incredible thing. So I think a lot of people are interested in climate credits and what that is, how Trees for the Future is involved in that growing interest. So can you define climate credits for us and help us learn a little bit more as Trees for the Future supporters, what we're doing in that space?
Yeah, so carbon credits are something that everybody is talking about right now, and we spent the last year kind of really looking at how could our projects fit into the carbon space, right? So what we really wanted to, when we started this whole conversation, we were just thinking or research into this. If we're going to do this, how can it benefit farmers? Mm-hmm. And one of the primary elements that interests us is this carbon credits is an emerging market. There's no set market for it yet, but they're emerging everywhere. The airlines, transportation industry. So we want farmers in any carbon project to be able to become part of that emerging market, not just be the tree growers, but benefit from that. But what happens with carbon projects is that somebody starts, you have the idea for the carbon project, you come up with the numbers and everything, but you have to go through a verification standard, and there's several different types of verification standards. And then those projects, once verified, then they're funded, implemented, and then you have to verify the amount of carbon that's coming out of them every few years. So that could be up to 3 to 5 years. And then those carbon credits are sold, and then a percentage would go back to the farmers, and a percentage would go to the investor or whoever funded that project.
Mm-hmm. And so, as I think I said climate credits earlier, but carbon credits, obviously. You mentioned that bringing the farmer in on this, and I think that's a really powerful part of our program across the board, is that the farmers and the communities where we work are benefiting constantly from this program. Can you explain a little bit about just maybe what the expectations are for this in the future, and what people, individuals, industries, different interests are expecting out of a carbon credit market?
So there's lots of different carbon projects out there. Like I said, some of them are avoided deforestation, some are mass tree planting, reforestation. The REDD has been along for a while, which was large reforestation projects. Agroforestry reforestation projects with farmers is kind of new. There are a couple organizations doing it. So we're it's an evolving process to really find out what that carbon potential is. And so a lot of people are a little bit weary of that, but also see the potential, particularly in the CCBs and the story. So they're not just planting trees, but they're impacting farmers' lives. They're bringing farmers into this emerging market. They're producing vegetables and fruits, and children are able to go to school, and people are increasing income. So all of these extra benefits are part of what people want to see beyond just the carbon credits.
Mm-hmm.
But the
continue.
Yeah. Oh, okay. But the what we're really seeing is like there are some critical elements that must be part of any project, and one is the farmer has to have land ownership. The farmer signs a carbon contract where part of the credits are going to the investor and part are going to the farmer. There's other things to look at, like the Paris Climate Agreement, where each country has nationally determined contributions that they are pledging to the Paris Climate Agreement, and will industries' carbon credits interfere with that? Other industries coming in and planting in the country when they already have other contributions that they're committing to. So that it's a really exciting time, because it is emerging and everybody's throwing in their ideas in the hat and trying to come up with the best models. But we're also in that space now, trying to come up with the best models for farmers, because I think farmers are often left out of those markets, those emerging markets. And as Trees for the Future, we're really focused on making sure that happens.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So for those of you who are just joining us, and we're kind of close to wrapping up, but we've got a few more minutes. Brandy and I are talking about the forest garden and carbon, and how the forest garden is helping to capture carbon, both mitigating and adapting to climate change as we know it today, and as we see it, continuing to be a problem throughout our lives. And so we've really touched on the forest garden, how much carbon that's sequestering, and the community climate benefits. Brandy, can you recap a little bit for those who have come in a little bit late, and just touch on how many trees make up a forest garden, how much carbon they're able to sequester within the trees as well as the soil, and kind of paint a broad picture for everybody tuning in?
So there's about 2,500 trees planted in the forest garden that are sequestering carbon throughout that 20-year period. And when you include the above and below ground biomass and the soil carbon sequestration potential, we're looking at about 145 metric tons of carbon per acre over that 20-year period. We are looking at different verification methodologies. With the forest garden method, it would be a sustainable land management methodology rather than reforestation methodology, I guess, because of that soil organic carbon sequestration potential, which is about 30% of that 145 metric ton value.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that recap. As we talk about carbon credits and what we're doing at Trees for the Future, and then as we've kind of gone into the carbon credit conversation, I think it's really incredible that obviously we wanted to do Good News Friday on carbon. I think this is something that can stress all of us out, overwhelm all of us so much as citizens of the world. And I hope for everybody viewing, it's clear how much work is being done to find these long-term solutions that are going to work not only for the planet, but the people that are implementing them. Brandy, what do you feel like on the ground when obviously you haven't been able to visit in the last year because of the pandemic, but how do the farmers feel about new building a growing microclimate on their land and being able to adapt to a changing climate?
So, I mean, farmers consistently talk about how things are changing rapidly, how the weather is shifting, how they don't know when to plant. So the forest garden offers that opportunity for that continuous growth of multiple crops. So if one crop fails, there is that opportunity to have other crops. So they see this as a really great adaptation mechanism. It does take a while to establish. It takes 4 years to establish a full forest garden. Within 2 years, it's being quite productive. So it takes a bit of dedication, but farmers are really starting to see that turnaround.
Mm-hmm. And I think Kendall is about to pop a question up for us. I'm not sure. I'll let her put it back up there if she's thinking about it. Until then, though. Yes, Pam. Pam's actually an ambassador of ours, and a very proud Texan, I think. And Brandy, she asks, have you considered implementing the forest garden approach in the U.S.? I would absolutely love to set up a forest garden here in El Paso, Texas. Weather's very dry, hot, desert climate. Can you tell us a little bit about forest garden approach possibilities, potential in the states, around the globe, and how people can access those resources?
So for our organization, we are not implementing projects in the U.S. In any time in the near future, but we do have resources that can help other people do that. So we have a forest garden training center that's online. I think Lindsay or someone will put the link in the chat. It's trees at trees.training.org. Mm-hmm. The Forest Garden Training Center provides all of the resources, not only to implement the forest garden, but to get certified as a trainer, and to really launch an initiative on your own doing this. With very similar methodology would be used that we use in Senegal, and it would be used in Texas. Because the climate is quite similar.
Mm-hmm. Yes, dry, hot.
Yeah.
It's training.trees.org for those of you who are interested in checking out the Forest Garden Training Center. Before we go, we just wanted to touch on one last thing. A lot of you frequent a specific page on our website, the Carbon Calculator. You can go to our website, enter in your general travel, your day-to-day activities, and you can get a report back on how much carbon you're contributing to the atmosphere, your carbon footprint. And then we calculate that for you and let you know how much you can donate to Trees for the Future, how many trees that would be equivalent to help offset your carbon. And so, as you know, in Earth Month and throughout this season of environmental focus, we're really encouraging our supporters to join the Sustainer Circle and become monthly donors to help make this impact possible month after month, year after year. And so if you've been considering becoming a sustainer, I really encourage you to take that next step. And if you're not sure how much you wanted to give, the Carbon Calculator might give you an idea of how much carbon you want to offset each month through Trees for the Future. And like I said, when we got started, we see a lot of familiar faces on here today. You all make this work possible. Obviously, Brandy and her team are working tirelessly to make these long-term climate solutions a reality in the countries where we work and around the world. So we're so grateful for all of your work, Brandy, and your team's work, as well as our individual donors, brand partners, and ambassadors tuning in today as well. So thank you, everybody across the board. Please keep it up. Please continue showing your support, and we'll drop some of these more of these resources in the comments for you, the Carbon Calculator, the Sustainer Circle page, so you can get involved and be part of the solution. Brandy, did you have anything to add before we go?
No, thank you so much, Lindsay. This has been great, and I just want to say hi to everyone and have a great weekend.
Yes, thank you. And remember, everybody, you can tune in next week for another Good News Friday. We'll be speaking with Jite from the field, so he'll be joining us from Senegal. So stay tuned for that invite, and I hope to see you there.